Do you ever feel like your brain is just racing with worry? Whether it's about your job, your relationships, or even things completely outside of your control. You're not alone. Worrying is something that our brain is wired to do, but too much of it can leave us feeling exhausted, anxious, and stuck. In this video, we explore why we worry, what's the science behind it, and most importantly, practical techniques to stop worrying so much. By the end of this video, you'll have loads of actionable tools that will quieten the mind and allow you to take back control. So let's dive in. But first, if you're new to this channel, I'd love you to subscribe. Simply click on the red button in the bottom right hand corner to learn some top tips on how to master your anxiety. So why do we worry? What's the science behind it? Worrying is not just a bad habit. It's actually hardwired into our brains. It's a survival technique or mechanism. According to Dr. Robert Leahy, author of The Worry Cure, our brains evolved to focus on potential threats and keep us alive. Early humans were worried about predators and food shortages, and we were much more likely to survive and pass on our genes to the next generation if we worried about stuff. The problem, our brains haven't evolved to keep up with modern life. We no longer worry about lions in bushes, but we do worry about things like deadlines at work, financial problems, social rejection, and health concerns. Okay, so what's the role of the brain here? Neuroscience shows us that worry is linked to our friends, the amygdala. The amygdala forms a key part of our limbic system, the emotional part of our brain, and it's responsible for processing our emotions, particularly fear and anxiety. It's highly active when we worry. Ethan Kross, author of the book Chatter, explains that worrying is often our brain's attempt to problem solve. Our brains are problem solving machines, but can lead to things spiraling out of control. When it does, the same worry thought just seems to keep going round and round our heads in an endless loop. This is known as rumination, and it tends to lead to mental exhaustion rather than finding solutions to the things we're worrying about. So, what's the problem with this excessive worry? Why do we get stuck in this endless worry loops? Firstly, our brain thinks that worrying is actually trying to help us and prepare us. We then feel like we're being responsible because we're thinking things through. But in reality, we're confusing worry with taking action. Excessive worry actually does the opposite. It drains our energy and makes decision making much harder. It keeps us stuck in fear instead of moving us forward. Dale Carnegie, in his timeless book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, explains most of what we worry about never, ever happens. One of the most common techniques I use with my clients who are chronic worriers is to ask them to write down all the things they're worrying about. And trust me, they have no problem filling an A4 piece of paper with all their worries. We then review it in a month. We go through them one by one, and in most cases, none of the things they're actually worrying about actually came to fruition. In fact, studies show that 85% of the things we worry about never ever happen. So, how do we break free from this cycle? Let's go through some of the most common and effective techniques to stop worrying so much. Here are my top 5 tips that you can take away and use today. Tip number 1, ask yourself, is this worry actually being productive? Not all worry is bad. Some worry actually helps us plan and prepare. That's kind of its function. But if you worry instead of taking action, it's likely to be a waste of your mental energy. So ask yourself, can I do something about this right now? If the answer is yes, take that action. If the answer is no, let it go. One of my favorite books on this topic is Russ Harris's The Happiness Trap, which teaches us how to stop fighting anxious thoughts and instead accept them without letting them control us. What Russ points out in this book and forms one of the core elements of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short, is that when we struggle, fight, or try to resist our anxieties, they only get worse. Dropping the struggle with worry and anxiety is the solution. Tip number 2, use the worry time technique. Schedule 10 minutes every day to write down all the things you're worrying about. Yes, take 10 minutes and actually write down all the things you're worrying about. Seriously, write down them in a worry journal. And at the end of the 10 minutes, stop and move on with your day. This technique helps you regain control over the worries instead of letting the worries control you. The book to check out on this is The Worry Cure by Dr. Robert Leahy. Mentioned this already. Here he deep dives into how to retrain your brain and stop over worrying. Tip number 3, shift from what if thinking to what is thinking. Worrying often sounds like, what if I mess up? What if something bad happens? Instead, shift to what is true right now. This grounds you in the reality instead of fearful imagination. And it helps your brain see that most of the fears that we have are exaggerated or highly unlikely. The book to check out on this is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. This is an amazing guide to staying present in the moment instead of worrying about the future. In this book, Tolle explains that most of the things that we're worrying about either happened in the past and therefore don't exist, or are things that may happen in the future, which also doesn't exist. In reality, the only thing that exists is now, but the now is tarnished by things that don't exist, the past and the future. Tip number 4, take action. Even small steps can help. Worrying tricks you into thinking you're doing something when in reality, you're not. The antidote? Real action. If I was to push any of my tips, it would be this one. If you're worried about a presentation, set aside some time today to practice a little. If you're worried about money, create a small budget plan. I worked with a client that had gotten himself into significant financial difficulties with an energy supplier. He spent most of his day and most of his sleep time worrying about the bailiffs coming round to the door to repossess his house. We discussed practically what he'd done to resolve the debt issue, and the answer turned out to be nothing. So the client agreed to call the energy supplier and he explained that he was in financial trouble. They turned out to be really helpful and put him in touch with a debt management agency for free. They then worked together to produce a workable plan to repay what he owed to the energy company. Instead of burying his head in the sand, which was making things worse, he faced up to his fear, came up with a plan, and the worrying stopped ruining his life. Book to check out on this, Atomic Habits by James Clear. In that book, he teaches how tiny little actions can lead to big changes over time. And tip number 5, practice mindfulness and deep breathing. Mindfulness is scientifically proven to reduce anxiety and overthinking. Try this simple breathing technique. Breathe in for 7 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and exhale for 11 seconds. And do this for 5, maybe 10 minutes a day. If you can do that, I trust you, your anxiety and your worry levels will drop significantly. And a book to check out on this, and there's literally hundreds of books on mindfulness and meditation, is 10% Happier by Dan Harris. In this book, he teaches meditation and how it can rewire your brain to calmness. It's really easy to follow and very accessible. And some final thoughts. You're not your worries. You're not your thoughts. Worrying is completely natural, but it doesn't have to control you. By understanding why we worry and using these strategies, you can train your brain to focus on the present, take action, and break free of the overthinking. If you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe for more practical tools on how to master your anxiety and take control of your life. What's one worry you're working on letting go today? Drop it in the comments. I always reply to the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.